الذين بالمسيح أتممتم المسيح قد
Hello, my listening audience. I've got some requests that I thought were interesting. One of them was that I should watch myself, and I did, and I saw that I move around a lot. Well, that's how I am. I'm a mover and a groover, and I can't help it. I gotta move. That's the energy coming out. So I hope you'll forgive me if you see me move around a little bit. Another one was that I kind of look a bit scruffy because I have my beard. Well, that's me, Scruffy Anthony, who's a mover and a groover. And I'm enjoying doing these very much. And I love your input because it inspires me. Because I did watch myself on a couple of YouTube to see how I can improve myself. And I want to touch on a touchy subject. I have a couple touchy subjects. And one of them, it has to do with, we talked about intermarriage. And let me just say that my terms of reference for those that are not Orthodox, or even if they are Orthodox and don't have, let's say, a theological background, when I talk about Father Alexander Schmemann, if I talk about John Meyendorf, if I talk about Verhofskoy or Nicholas Arseniev, they were all my professors at St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary. At the time, we were at West 121st Street, across from Union Seminary and down the street from Columbia University. So just so you know, in the context of some of my references, because these men were geniuses, and Florovskoy, who was also one of the references. So please excuse me if I just throw those names out. But I want to talk about the intermarriage between Christian and non-Christian, and about Christian and Christian. So we'll start with an Orthodox marrying an unorthodox Christian. I always had a premarital conferences at my church in Montreal, and we had a series of speakers. I usually let it off at the very first and then ended it. And if we think today that young Orthodox kids are going to marry Greeks and Russians and Serbians and Lebanese and Syrians, well, I don't think that's exactly going to happen. So many of our marriages are mixed marriages between Orthodox Christians and other Christians. Well, always my first premise, as I mentioned in my first YouTube on intermarriage, was it's best if you have commonality. I always suggest that the couples share the same faith, not only for their own marriages, but for the sake of their children, so that they don't feel torn, especially during feast days, namely Easter, with some Christmas, between old calendar, new calendar, etc., etc. The more things a couple have in common, the better it is for the kids to have a firm and safe foundation from which to fly, to soar, when they reach that age to do so. Because no kids want to sit around a dinner table and hear the parents fight over religion. So I always suggest, hopefully with gentleness and prayer, that the spouse, who he or she, and whoever is the strongest in their faith, should become Orthodox by confession or chrismation, which is a short service, and to take communion together prior to the wedding. Do you know how important it is that the wedding be sealed at the altar and at the Eucharist? That you are one in Christ? That's so important, that the couple receive the Eucharist the Sunday before the wedding. And when they come back from the honeymoon for the blessing of the crowns, that they take communion again together. This seals the divine aspect of their marriage, which I think is immensely important. In my experience, it is those couples that have the longest and durable marriages, because they are linked together not just by bodily flesh, but by Jesus Christ, who is the center of their marriage. Now, there's a problematic when it comes to marrying a non-Christian. In my experience, in the Middle East, I learned this from the patriarch. That's something that I made up. That if a Muslim wishes to marry an Orthodox Christian, if they would accept, and I had this many, many times, to be baptized. Not by compulsion, but by willingness to be baptized. And that the chrismation and the communion would take place at a later date, once they were more integrated in their understanding of the faith of the church and of the biblical injunction regarding marriage and Jesus Christ's place at the marriage. I've had Zoroastrians, Hindu, Pakistani, and there are Iranians, as well as Sunni or Shiite Muslim that have married, and Jewish, don't let me forget that. Now I've had some young girls that marry Jewish boys, and one Jewish boy, one, I think he's from Iran. They got married in a civil ceremony, but the women said, we're not leaving our faith. Even though the parents of let's say the groom, insisted on a religious wedding they said, we're going to have a civil marriage because I don't want to give up my Orthodox faith, which means a great deal to me. And I want to baptize my children in the Orthodox Church. Now, as a practical matter, and please don't think I'm a heretic, I've had many such couples that came to me after the civil wedding and asked for a blessing. And even those non-Christians felt it very important that they had the blessing of the groom or the wife's priest in their church, in a private setting. I feel that it's a way of keeping those kids in the church. And I know by experience that later on, their partners joined the church, but they did it on their own and not by compulsion. It even says in the Quran, there's no compulsion in religion. Now, those marriages are harder, and it takes a lot of work and willpower and prayer for those marriages to sustain themselves. But I believe as a pastor, there has to be a pastoral approach. I know priests that told the kids, no way, Charlie, can you get married in the Orthodox Church? Because we know that in order for the sacrament to be performed, the two must be Christian and baptized, and one of them at least to be sacramentally united to the Orthodox Church. But I know that other churches have been really tough on that. And some of these kids came to see me. They were non-Lebanese. And in the end, when I sat down and talked to the kids, that the women agreed to be baptized and enter into the church fully, because I explained to them, and I even use their religion to show the parallelisms that exist in their faith community and that of the Orthodox Church, without compromising the Christness and Christ-centered and Trinitarian dimension of our wedding and of our services. It takes a great deal. Now, I learned this from the late Patriarch Ignatius IV of Antioch. And how many times did I hear him say that God is beyond the book? God is in the face of every human being who are created in the image of God. And I think and I even heard priests that wouldn't church a baby whose mother was Orthodox and married in the Catholic Church, let us say, but wanted to stay Orthodox and baptize their kid Orthodox, came to the church to have the baby blessed, and the priest refused. He lost the couple altogether. So, let me conclude with this. We need a pastoral approach in our contemporary society in dealing with the intermarriages, either between Christian or non-Christians. The pastor ought to show compassion and not just be juridical and cast these people into oblivion. God bless you.